Imagine waking up every day at sunrise just to spend hours yanking brains out through nostrils, stuffing bodies with spices, and arguing over whether someone's spleen counts as a sacred organ. Welcome to the life of an ancient Egyptian. Embalmer, underpaid, overworked, and surrounded by corpses. While TikTok scrolls through ASMR and aesthetic skincare, these guys were applying resin to dead pharaohs by candlelight. Glorified morticians or sacred miracle workers. Depends who you ask. But if you thought your job was thankless, wait till you hear what happens when you accidentally embalm a noble with the wrong type of natron. Hit subscribe, because if you're gonna fall asleep to ancient corpse wranglers and sacred entrails, it might as well be with the most sarcastically soothing history lesson you've ever heard. The first thing you notice is the sand. It's in your mouth, your ears, your bedroll, and yes, between your toes. Again, the Nile may be the lifeblood of Egypt, but it's also the world's most persistent exfoliant. It's sunrise in Thebes, around 1290 BCE, and our hero, and I use that word generously, is already regretting waking up. Meet Ahmose. He's not a pharaoh, not a priest, not even a scribe. No, Ahmose is what we might kindly call a mid-tier corpse technician, an embalmer, an artisan of rot, a master of the posthumous makeover, and today, like every day, he's got one job: make dead people look presentable for eternity. Now, if you think that sounds glamorous, like the ancient world's version of a high-end mortician, let's just pause and recalibrate. This is not a Netflix original about sacred rituals and moonlit chanting. This is a man, bent at the waist, swatting flies off a corpse, muttering curses about supply shortages and chronic lower back pain. His workshop, less temple of the gods, more open-air slaughterhouse with aspirations. There's a wooden table stained with generations of what we'll politely call spiritual leakage, clay jars arranged in disturbingly cheerful rows, and a pile of used linens that smells like a goat died in a spice rack. He begins his day, as always, with a prayer to Anubis, god of embalming, jackal-headed supervisor of the dead. The prayer is mumbled, partly out of reverence, mostly out of fatigue. It's hard to feel spiritually enlightened before your first beer, and yes, beer. Breakfast of champions. Or in this case, embalmer-grade grog brewed with barley, regret, and possibly a few beetles. It's warm, flat, and tastes faintly of yesterday's incense ash, but it does the trick. Mostly Ahmose drains his clay cup with a wince and surveys the day's to-do list. One noblewoman just expired. 2 merchant-class husbands whose grieving wives each insist theirs deserves extra oils, and a toddler whose family paid up front and now insists on full ceremonial honors. Because nothing says eternal peace like negotiating with grieving clients over how many amulets a two-year-old really needs. Let that sink in. The guy hasn't even brushed his teeth, and already he's planning organ extraction on a baby. Now, you might ask, why would anyone choose this line of work? The pay is decent, if you enjoy being compensated in bread and dried fish. There's a certain spiritual cachet, assuming you don't mind being whispered about in the streets, as that guy who fondles the dead. And of course, there's the thrill of ritual, the intoxicating feeling that your actions actually affect the afterlife. But make no mistake, it's mostly just smelly, repetitive labor. Emos gathers his tools, a bronze blade for incisions, a hook for brains. We'll get to that next chapter. Oh yes, we will. Linen strips, and a fresh batch of natron, which looks like a fine white powder, but smells like a mummy's armpit. And he starts humming to himself, a little something to drown out the flies. It's catchy. You'd hum too if you were about to open someone's chest cavity before breakfast. As the sun climbs, the heat sets in, the flies multiply. The stench becomes almost metaphysical, a pungent mix of myrrh, sweat, and something you don't want to identify. If you could bottle it, you could end wars. Or start them. Amos's first client is a noblewoman, recently deceased, teeth surprisingly intact. He adjusts her on the table with the tenderness of someone handling a fragile, angry relative. A priest appears to perform the purification rites, muttering over her with the dramatic intensity of a man who's memorized the lines but not the meaning. Amos nods politely, waiting. This will take a while. It always does. Behind the scenes, apprentices bicker over which jar is for intestines it's diminutive, obviously, and whether the linen stash has been blessed. Spoiler, it has not. There's some confusion over a delivery of cedar oil, which smells divine but costs more than Amos's entire house. Someone has accidentally spilled it on the floor. Chaos ensues, and through it all, Amos keeps working. Hands steady, eyes alert, stomach rumbling. There's no lunch break in the land of the dead. You see, every step is sacred and a little terrifying. One wrong move, one mispronounced chant, one linen wrap out of place, and the spirit might get cranky. No one wants a cranky spirit. They're like bureaucrats with wings, endlessly vengeful and catastrophically petty. But Amos has a system, a rhythm: cut, drain, rinse, pack. Chant, bless, wrap, repeat. He doesn't just work with the dead, he partners with them, like a silent co-worker who never leaves the office, which is poetic when you think about it, or disturbing. Possibly both. By mid-morning, his tunic is stained. His hands smell like resin and formal decay. The noblewoman has been carefully packed and is currently marinating in natron like an unholy brisket. The apprentices are finally quiet. Even the priest has wandered off, muttering something about lunch and divine exhaustion, and Amos, he sits on a stool made of creaky wood and bad decisions, takes another swig of beer, and stares out at the Nile. It's blue today, calm, peaceful. The boats drift lazily past, hauling grain, gossip, and the occasional goat. He breathes, just once, slowly, because in a few minutes he'll have to start again. Another corpse, another prayer. Another family insisting their dearly departed deserves extra wrappings. Always extra wrappings. As if the gods are rating mummies on presentation. But for now, it's quiet. Just for a breath. Just enough to forget that his life revolves around people who can't say thank you. And maybe, just maybe, that's the real magic. Not the chants, not the oils, not the 1,000-year rituals. Just this, a man, alone, doing the hardest. Job in Egypt, and still remembering to look up at the river once in a while, so yeah. Breathe that in, dust and all. Let's talk about brains. More specifically, let's talk about how ancient Egyptians viewed them, which is to say, they didn't, at all. In the sacred hierarchy of body parts, the brain was basically the appendix of the head. Useless, forgettable, something you tossed out like old garlic paste. Because in their divinely inspired anatomical chart, the heart was the big boss, seat of the soul, vault of memories, decision maker, emotion holder, and, oddly enough, your spiritual credit score. The brain, A squishy afterthought. So what do you do with an organ nobody respects? Simple. You yank it out of a dead person's skull through the nose. And yes, it's every bit as awful as it sounds. Amos knows this part of the job well, too well. He's done it so many times, he could probably do it blindfolded, while swatting flies and composing a hymn to Osiris, which he nearly did last week, but we don't talk about that today. His client, is a middle-aged merchant who reportedly died shouting at his youngest son for dropping a pot. The irony, he'll now spend eternity with his brain liquefied like porridge, thanks to that very son who cheerfully dropped him off with a please make him look noble. So Amos gets to work. First, he grabs a long, thin hook, a sinister-looking tool with the elegance of a bent knitting needle and the personality of a horror prop. It's designed to slide up the nostril, bypassing the sinus cavity, and scramble the brain like it's a spiritual omelette. Then, with practiced grace, you tilt the head down and let gravity and shame do their thing. Drip, drip, plop. And just like that, Dad's memories of yelling at his family ooze out in gloopy little strings. Let that image lull you to sleep. The actual process takes about 20 minutes, unless the skull's been particularly stubborn, in which case it takes longer and usually involves cursing in 3 different dialects and one apprentice fainting quietly in the corner. Of course, the Egyptians didn't see this as barbaric. Far from it. This was sacred work. They were liberating the soul from its useless meat machine. In their view, the heart did all the thinking, the gut did all the emoting, and the brain, well, it just sat there like a cucumber in a jewelry box. Modern science has obviously disagreed, but back then, the idea of keeping the brain was as absurd as, say, embalming someone with their gallbladder. Why preserve what doesn't matter? But here's the real kicker. They were half right. While their anatomical logic was flawed, their instincts weren't entirely bonkers. Removing the brain helped prevent decomposition. Less brain meant less rot, fewer bugs, and a better smelling eternity. So even if their reasons were mystically misguided, their technique surprisingly advanced. It's one of those weird intersections where ancient superstition stumbles into practical genius, like using onions for healing wounds, or building pyramids that double as giant sundials/tourist attractions. Now, Amos isn't reflecting on any of this, by the way. He's too busy trying not to sneeze into the cavity of a half-opened skull. But you, dear viewer, you get the gift of perspective. You're lounging in your blanket burrito, watching history drip out through someone's nasal canal, while sipping chamomile tea. Luxury. There's a pause in the action as Amos swaps out the hook for a fresh one. This one's slightly curved. Better for dislodging the bits that cling, like forgotten regrets, or the part of the brain that stores dad jokes. He mumbles a quick chant under his breath, something to appease Anubis, and maybe also cover for the fact that he hasn't slept in 3 days. The chant translates loosely to, "O jackal of death, may this goo not stain my tunic again." It won't work. It never does. Meanwhile, the apprentices hover like anxious vultures. One's holding a basin to catch the remains. The other is making notes, possibly for later blackmail. Because in the world of embalming, hierarchy matters. And if you're the one holding the drip bowl, you're still paying your dues. Eventually, the job is done. The skull is empty, hollow, peaceful, in a weirdly unnerving way. Amos tilts the head back up and inspects his work. No damage, no fracture. A clean extraction. That's craftsmanship. That's art, or at least, that's what he tells himself to sleep at night. You might be wondering, did this ever go wrong? Oh yes, there are records. Skulls fractured by careless hands, hooks that snapped mid-process. Apprentices who got creative and started stirring like it was a stew. Some mummies were buried with bits of brain still sloshing around, which, if the Book of the Dead is to be believed, might have caused a few awkward detours in the afterlife. And then there's the worst case scenario, botching the job of a high-status corpse. Nobles don't like leaks, neither do their families. One embalmer famously fled Thebes after accidentally piercing a pharaoh's eye socket while aiming for the brain. Oops, so yes, there was pressure. Eternal, divine, don't mess this up pressure. But Amos, he's a professional. He knows how to keep his tools clean, his nose hooks sharp, and his conscience quiet. He places the empty-headed merchant gently aside, covering him with a linen cloth. One down, two to go, and as he washes his hands in a basin of perfumed water, cinnamon, myrrh, and probably a hint of despair, he pauses, not because he's tired, not because the sun is now directly overhead and the flies are circling like tiny buzzards, but because there's a strange peace in this moment. In the silence after the scramble, in the stillness of a head now emptied of thought. It's morbid, sure, macabre, possibly deranged, but it's also serene. Ever wonder what future civilizations will say about our medical decisions, about our surgeries, our preservatives, our rituals? Maybe they'll mock us, maybe they'll marvel, or maybe, just maybe, they'll watch videos like this, late at night, and whisper, wow, these people were weird, but weirdly brilliant. There's a particular moment in every embalmer's day just after the brain has been scrambled, scooped, and quietly judged, where things go from gross to gritty. And by gritty, I mean literal grit. Enter natron. If you've never handled natron, congratulations on your life choices. It's ancient Egypt's answer to modern embalming fluid. Except, instead of chemicals in a syringe, it's a crusty cocktail of sodium carbonate, sodium bicarbonate, sodium chloride, and just enough dirt to remind you you're not special. To the untrained eye, natron looks like dusty baking soda with a superiority complex. To Amos, it looks like the difference between a blessed eternal rest and a very squishy, very smelly afterlife. Today's batch arrives in a woven basket that was probably made by someone underpaid and oversweaty. The powder has a faint sparkle to it like fairy dust, if fairies were into corpse dehydration. Amos sifts his fingers through it, muttering something about this better not be last week's reject pile. He can tell, good natron has a certain ... dryness. Bad natron, clumps. No one wants to be remembered as the guy who left moisture in a mummy. Moisture, after all, is the enemy. Now, this part of the embalming process, it's not flashy. There's no dramatic chanting, no gods hovering overhead with glowing eyes, no apprentices fainting from nasal hook shock. Just a whole lot of scooping, packing, and waiting. First, Amos prepares the body, empty of organs, brainless, carefully rinsed with palm wine, which smells festive but stings like divine punishment. Then comes the powder. You don't just sprinkle it, you stuff it. Every crevice, every cavity, every awkward bend and sacred fold gets the natron treatment, and here's where it gets delightfully disgusting. The body now looking like a tomato with regrets will be packed in and around with natron for 40 days. Yes, 40, because mummification is not a quick fix. It's a slow roast. Over those 40 days, the body loses all its moisture. Muscles shrivel, skin toughens, eyeballs gone, tongue disintegrated. What's left is a taut, leathery approximation of a human being. Less eternal soul carrier, more haunted jerky. Let that sink in, and yet, this was considered beautiful, holy, even. Dryness was purity, decay was chaos. You don't want Uncle Neferhotep dripping through the sarcophagus, do you? No, you want him crisp, preserved, and spiritually airtight. Of course, none of this is cheap. Natron had to be mined from dry lake beds, hauled in carts across blistering terrain, and stored like it was divine confetti. A noble family could go broke trying to afford the good stuff. Poorer families, they got the bargain bin batch, still blessed, technically, but with fewer sparkles and slightly more sand fleas. Amos inspects his latest delivery. The merchant's family paid well, not pharaoh well, but didn't haggle about. Amulets well, so the natron is decent. Still, he remembers that one time, it was 4 summers ago, a high official died unexpectedly choking on goat meat, according to rumors, and the family demanded a rush job. The temple was low on natron, desperate times. A junior embalmer, who shall remain nameless, mostly because no one saw him again, decided to stretch the powder with ash. Yes, ash from burnt papyrus scrolls. For the first week, everything looked fine. By the second, the smell started. By the third, the body began to weep, little brownish tears leaking from the eye sockets. That's when the maggots showed up, and the noble family. They showed up with a priest and a legal scroll. Let's just say there were curses, real ones, written in red ink, so no, Amos doesn't skimp on natron. He begins the process, pouring generous handfuls into the body cavity, tucking it behind the ribs like a sleep-deprived baker stuffing a pie. Then he mounds it beneath the limbs, behind the ears, even between the toes. Every gap gets filled. Thoroughness is key. The apprentices watch in silence. There's something solemn about this part, the quiet packing of death with powdered eternity. One of them asks, timidly, "What if you forget a spot?" Amos doesn't answer. He just raises an eyebrow and jerks his head toward a nearby bundle, a long-forgotten corpse that was underpacked and now buzzes with flies. Lesson learned. The heat rises as the sun passes noon. The workshop smells like dried herbs, old sweat, and powdered sorrow. Natron clings to every surface. It's in Amos's hair, under his nails, probably in his lunch by now. And yet, there's comfort in the rhythm, scoop, press, chant, adjust, repeat. Somewhere in this grainy mess is the hope of eternity. The promise that decay can be cheated, that death doesn't have to stink, and for all its flaws, the cost, the mess, the unfortunate side effect of drying out your knuckles until they resemble crocodile scales. Natron works, the bodies don't. Rot, they endure. Centuries from now, someone will crack open this tomb, peel back these linen layers, and marvel at the preservation. They'll gasp, take photos, publish papers, mispronounce Amos's name with confidence, and maybe, just maybe, wonder what kind of powder could keep flesh intact for millennia. Spoiler, it's this stuff, but Amos doesn't care about future archaeologists. He cares about the merchant's son, who will arrive in 3 weeks demanding a progress update and offering unsolicited notes like, can he look less dry? No, he cannot. That's literally the point. Amos wipes his hands, coughing slightly as the natron dust rises in the air. He squints at the sun, already tilting toward late afternoon. Another body. Another drying. Just another day in the powdery paradise of ancient embalming. But tomorrow, the noble family comes. And rumor has it, they brought their own natron from Memphis, imported artisanal which, in embalming terms, is like walking into a coffee shop and asking if the beans are shade-grown. Ahmose is not impressed, but he'll smile, nod, and dehydrate their uncle like the professional he is, because even powdered nightmares have their place in sacred ritual. If you thought the brain removal scene was the peak of ancient Egyptian weirdness, allow me to introduce you to the real star of the embalming show, the internal organ treasure hunt. Welcome to the sacred organ shuffle, part sacred ritual, part anatomical scavenger hunt, and fully guaranteed to ruin your appetite after a body's been brained and brined in natron. The next step is turning the internal landscape into a divine Airbnb for the soul. But first, the organs have to be evicted carefully, reverently, and with surgical tools that look like rejected dental equipment. Amos still picking natron dust out of his beard, sighs as he eyes the next client, a portly scribe named Pennywell, who, judging by his girth, died doing what he loved, overindulging in lentils. He rolls up his sleeves. This part's always a bit, splashy, using a ritual blade, not too sharp, not too dull. Goldilocks-style Amos makes the ceremonial incision along the left flank. Left side only, right side blasphemous. Could doom the soul to an eternity of wandering the field of reeds, looking for its pancreas. No one wants that. The cut releases a puff of musty air, and something that smells like fermented onions married a dead cat. The apprentices take a synchronized step backward. Cowards. One by one, the sacred bits come out. First, the liver. Big, red, slippery. Sacred to City, the human-headed guardian of blood filters and questionable dietary decisions. It gets gently rinsed, wrapped, and placed in a jar shaped like a grumpy little man. Next, the stomach. Twisty, veiny, and surprisingly poetic when viewed through the right spiritual lens. Guarded by Duamutef, the jacko-headed canopic deity who definitely skipped charm school. Into his jar goes the stomach, still faintly scented with garlic and poor life choices. Then the lungs, pale and soft. Hoppy, the baboon-headed god of wheezers and wheezing, gets these. The jar stares back at Amos with a frozen monkey grimace that seems to say, "This is not what I signed up for." And finally, the intestines, long coiled, existentially offensive. Kebeson Youth, the falcon-headed jar guardian, is tasked with these. No one envies him, not even the other gods. Now, you'd think that after thousands of years, they'd have streamlined this process. But no, each organ is its own sacred production, with prayers, rinsing oils, linen wrappings, and awkward, handing off ceremonies that feel like a mystical relay race. Let that settle in your mind for a moment. Somewhere in ancient Egypt, a teenage apprentice is solemnly passing a liver to a baboon jar while chanting in Middle Egyptian and trying not to drop it, sacred work. There's even a designated priest called the cutter who performs the initial incision and then runs off, literally, to avoid being spiritually contaminated. This isn't metaphorical. He actually sprints away after the cut, because nothing says spiritual professionalism like stabbing a corpse and fleeing the scene. Amos, of course, does most of the grunt work. The cutting priest is more symbolic these days. Union rules. Probably as the final jar is sealed and smeared with resin, one of the apprentices asks the question they always ask: why do we keep the organs in jars, but toss the brain? Amos pauses, looks up, wipes a smear of natron off his cheek, then replies with the dry sarcasm of a man who's had this conversation too many times, because the gods didn't major in neuroscience. The apprentice nods solemnly, pretending that made sense. It did not. There's some debate among scholars, and, occasionally, embalmers themselves, about whether all the organs were removed. Some sources say the heart was taken out and then popped back in like a divine USB drive. Others argue it was never touched at all. Why? Because the heart was the sacred resume, the thing the gods would weigh against the feather of truth in the afterlife to determine whether you were good, bad, or going to be eaten by a giant crocodile-lion-hippo hybrid named Amit. No pressure, Amos. He's seen it both ways. Some families demand the heart be left in place. Others want it stored in a separate jar. Once, a client insisted it be buried outside the body to confuse evil spirits. That particular mummy twitched during wrapping. Never forget. And here's the real problem with all this divine plumbing. Mistakes happen. A misplaced lung, a mislabeled jar. One infamous apprentice once put the stomach in the hoppy jar and the liver in the falcon. A minor mix-up. Sure, unless you believe that misplacing your entrails could curse your soul into eternal indigestion. That apprentice now works as a goat herder. So, Amos double-checks each label, murmuring the names of the 4 sons of Horus, as he does. Imsidi, Hopi, Duamutif, Kebesanyuf, like a sacred grocery list with eternal consequences. The jars are finally arranged, neatly, reverently, in the order of divine preference. They'll eventually be buried with the body, close enough to serve as quick access in the afterlife, but far enough to discourage post-mortem rummaging. And as the afternoon sun spills across the workshop floor, Amos exhales. Not from relief. From habit. There are still wrappings to do. Still prayers. Still that persistent itch in the middle of his back he can't reach. But for now, the organs are out. The jars are sealed. The body is hollow and ready to be stuffed with resin-soaked linen, precious amulets, and hopeful whispers, ready for the next step in the long, strange journey from human to eternal being. And as Amos watches a fly land briefly on Duamutef's jackal nose, he allows himself a moment of reflection. This is weird work. Holy, yes. Sacred, certainly. But weird. You remove someone's guts, wrap them like leftovers, and call it grace. But maybe, just maybe, it is grace, even if it smells like onions and looks like a pottery display of internal regret. At some point in history, someone probably sleep-deprived and elbow-deep in entrails decided that the path to immortality was textiles, not gold, not glory, not divine lasers from Ra himself. No, immortality apparently comes courtesy of hundreds of yards of linen and a serious time commitment. And so began the sacred art of wrapping. Now, wrapping a corpse might sound like the easy part. You've already removed the brain, packed it with natron, extracted the organs, and dodged several supernatural curses. How hard could it be to play dress-up with a mummy? Amos would like to speak with whoever thought that. The thing about wrapping is, it's not just folding linen around a corpse like a spooky burrito. It's a ritual, a delicate, layer-by-layer symphony of preservation, protection, and repetitive chanting that takes days. Yes, days, plural. And if you mess up even once, congratulations, You've just doomed someone's soul to wander the afterlife wrapped in asymmetry. This morning, Amos is already regretting being alive. The body of Pennyweret, now natron cured and Jorrigan complete, is lying in front of him, like a very judgmental, jerky sculpture. The linen rolls await nearby, stacked like divine toilet paper, and the smell of resin hangs in the air like burnt optimism. He begins with the fingers. Always the fingers. Each one must be wrapped individually with thin strips of linen soaked in resin. Why? Because ancient Egyptians believed in attention to detail. And also because the Book of the Dead said loose fingers invite chaos. Yes, chaos. All from a pinky left exposed. By the time Amos finishes the fingers and toes, his back aches, his knuckles are stiff, and he's muttering the words of the protective spell under his breath, like a customer reciting a bad Yelp review. Then come the limbs wrapped tightly, but not too tight. Over-tightening leads to cracking. Cracking leads to angry ghosts. Angry ghosts lead to poor business reviews. It's a whole thing. The apprentices help, kind of. One holds the linen, another applies the resin, and a third, just kind of, stands there, watching, hoping not to be assigned elbow duty, which is widely regarded as the most annoying joint to wrap due to its weird bend and smug shape. Amos works rhythmically. Wrap, brush, chant. Wrap, brush, chant. It's like an ancient spa treatment, only permanent, and much less relaxing. Every few layers, he pauses to insert protective amulets. There's the scarab, pressed against the heart cavity. A symbol of rebirth. The Eye of Horus, tucked beneath the throat for protection. A miniature jed pillar for spinal stability in the afterlife. Because, apparently, eternal posture matters. It's not just spiritual, it's anatomical feng shui. Let that sink in. By midday, the torso is swaddled like a sacred burrito. The head, however, is its own battle. The jaw must be wrapped shut, but gently, lest the deceased look like they're screaming into eternity. And the eyes. Linen pads go over them, soaked in oils and pressed flat, giving the face a serene, if slightly bloated, expression. It's tedious. It's delicate, and it smells like a spice merchant's nightmare. Resin, by the way, is sticky. Very sticky. Think tree sap meets molasses meets spiritual glue. Amos's fingers are crusted in it. At one point, he accidentally sticks a strip of linen to his forehead and wears it like a divine headband for an hour. No one tells him that's how tired everyone is. But they keep going, because every layer matters. Every wrap is a prayer, a plea, a line in the sacred insurance policy that says, please don't let this soul get eaten by Amit. Every fold is symbolic, a shield against darkness, a barrier against rot, a band-aid on death itself. At one point, the apprentice sneezes, loudly, The workshop goes silent. Amos pauses, staring. You interrupted the binding of the 9th layer, he says, voice flat. The apprentice swallows. Sorry, you just doomed his knees to spiritual draftiness. A beat, then Amos sighs. Redo the legs. No one complains. They just nod. Because this is serious work. Also, no one wants to be haunted by a ghost with cold knees. By sunset, the mummy is mostly complete. Dozens of linen layers, each reinforced with resin, prayers, and amulets in case what was once a man named Pennyweret. Now he's something else. Not quite corpse. Not quite statue. Somewhere between man and myth. And still, Amos isn't done. The final layer is a full-body shroud. Thick linen, often painted with spells or adorned with gold. Amos rolls it out carefully, smoothing the creases with hands that shake just slightly from fatigue. As he lays it over the wrapped form, he recites the closing prayer. O you who are whole again, who are made sacred by bandage and balm, walk forth in peace to the land of the blessed. There's silence after. Not reverent silence, just tired silence. The kind that comes when you've used your last roll of linen, your last drop of resin, and possibly the last of your patience. And in that stillness, the absurdity of it all settles in. They've turned a person into a parcel, a soul into sculpture, all in the name of eternal life. Modern people pay for cryogenic freezing or digital consciousness backups. Ancient Egyptians, they wrapped you up and hoped the gods were watching still. It's kind of beautiful, a craft, a faith, a comfort, however fragile, that death could be softened by layers of care. As Amos stretches out his aching arms, he looks down at his work. Not perfect, a little uneven on the left shoulder, but good, the kind of good that might get you. Remembered, the kind of good that means something, even if you'll never know it. Death, as it turns out, is no excuse to look sloppy. If you thought the elaborate wrapping process was the end of the embalming fashion show, allow me to introduce the final catwalk of the ancient world, dressing the dead. A posthumous makeover, complete with accessories, statement pieces, and depending on your social status, a full glittering send-off into eternity. Think Project Runway. But everyone's already horizontal. Amos stands over the newly wrapped mummy of Pennywerit, squinting critically. The linen layers are clean, symmetrical, resin-sealed, and spiritually sound. But naked, oh no, that simply won't do. Because even in death, appearances matter. Especially if your afterlife involves running into Osiris and you're not wearing your ceremonial jewelry. Embarrassing. He reaches for the box of funerary accessories, a wooden crate that smells like cedar and ambition. Inside, amulets, charms, gold leaf fragments, and one particularly gaudy collar that looks like it was designed by a jackal with boundary issues. The body may be still, but the fashion rules are alive and well. First, the amulets now. These weren't just decorative. Each one had a job. The scarab protected the heart. The Tayet not brought the favor of Isis. The Ankh, eternal life. And the Ujet, the eye of Horus, warded off evil and judged your fashion sense. Probably Amos places them one by one across the linen-wrapped chest, muttering brief blessings. His fingers are still sticky from yesterday's resin marathon, and one of the amulets briefly adheres to his thumb like a cosmic sticker. He peels it off with a sigh every time. The apprentices look on, trying to memorize the placement. Order, get it wrong, and the afterlife turns into a scavenger hunt. One amulet too high, and your soul might trip on its way to paradise. To low and well, no one wants to be spiritually pantsed in front of the gods. Then comes the jewelry. Amos pulls out a heavy Usyk collar, a broad beaded necklace, so ornate it could be seen from across the Nile. It once belonged to Pennywerit, uncle, who was buried in a cheaper version. The family, ever status conscious, requested it be displayed proudly on the mummy. Amos oblivious, though he notes quietly that eternity probably doesn't have a fashion police. Probably the rings come next. One for the right pinky, another for the left index finger, a third that doesn't quite fit, but is forced on anyway, with the gentle aggression of someone putting socks on a reluctant toddler. This is, after all, for symbolic purposes, not comfort. No one's worried about post-mortem circulation. Then, the piece de resistance, the fake beard. Yes, that's right. A beard in death. Everyone wants to look like a pharaoh. Even if you weren't royalty in life, a fake beard says, "I've made it." It's glued on carefully, reverently, to the chin with resin and a quiet prayer for dignity. Penny Werit, now fully accessorized, looks impressive, imposing even, like a man ready to file divine paperwork in the afterlife, or scold a minor deity for being late. But not all clients get this treatment. Amos remembers. A farmer's wife from 2 seasons ago. No jewelry, no amulets, just plain linen and a single bead tied around her ankle. And yet, the family wept harder for her than any noble he'd ever seen. Maybe the gods don't care about gold. Maybe they just notice the care. Still, money talks. And this morning, money knocks. Hard, a new client has arrived. A noblewoman named Jedit, freshly deceased and extremely well connected. Her son, a priest with eyeliner sharper than most knives, enters the workshop with the air of someone who thinks embalming is a performance art meant for his amusement. He clears his throat dramatically. We've brought our own gold. Oh, joy behind him. Servants unload an assortment of glittering trinkets, armlets, toe rings, jeweled scarabs, the size of baby pigeons. One piece is a solid lapis lazuli pendant in the shape of a falcon, rumored to have been blessed by a high priest, who hadn't blinked since Ramses was a toddler. Amos blinks slowly. Lovely, he says, voice flat. The priest nods. Also, we'd like her to be buried with her dog. Amos stares. Alive? Of course not. The priest laughs. He passed last year. He's been waiting in Natron. Of course he has. So now Amos must dress not one, but 2 mummies, a woman and her mummified dog, which is about the size of a house cat and has a face like it just learned death was optional. He starts with the dog. Tiny amulet for the neck. Linen bow around the tail. Done.djed, however, is a project. They want gold on the wrists, gold on the ankles, gold sewn into the shroud. They want a miniature book of the dead tucked under her arm, and a tiny reed brush tied to her fingers, because she used to be a scribe and wouldn't want to be seen without her tools. Eternity, after all, is no place to be unprepared, still watching. Then you know what to do. Hit that subscribe before we start gluing sacred wigs on Grandma Amos complies. Methodically, patiently, with the kind of numbed professionalism only someone who's glued 50 beards on 50 dead people can muster. And yet, as he finishes, the final placement, a delicate diadem of gold, wire and lapis strung across the forehead. He pauses. There's something beautiful here. Absurd, yes. Over the top, absolutely. But beautiful. In life, we dress to impress others. In death, we dress to impress the divine. And in between, there's Amos, tired, sticky, surrounded by corpses in couture. He steps back, takes one long look and exhales. Jedit is ready, her dog is ready, and Amos. He still has 12 more mummies on the schedule this week, but at least for now, everyone's dressed to the nines. Even if they're not walking anywhere. Ancient Egyptian funerals were not quiet affairs. You might expect a stately procession, soft flute music, solemn head bows, maybe a few tasteful tears. What you get instead? A cacophony of wailing, incense smoke thick enough to choke a baboon, and the distant yet distinct scent of goat. Yes, goat. We'll get there. Today's funeral is for the noblewoman Jedit, recently wrapped in 5 layers of linen, 3 pounds of gold, and the sort of spiritual confidence that only comes with a personal priest and an embalmed dog. Amos stands off to the side, dressed in his ceremonial linen, which frankly still smells faintly of natron despite his best effort. His role is largely done. The heavy lifting, literal and emotional, now belongs to the family, the hired mourners, and the professional howlers. Yes, howlers. That's a job here. The procession begins at the house of mourning, a grand villa with palm-lined courtyards, and the distinct vibe of we own multiple boats. Servants carry trays of date cakes and sour wine. A cousin faints for dramatic effect. The grieving son, the priest with eyeliner so sharp it could kill a beetle at 20 paces, opens the ceremony with a practiced sob that would make any stage actor applaud. Enter the mourners. These are not relatives. They are professionals, women paid to cry, scream, and generally outmourn everyone else. Their goal: convince the gods and the neighbors that Jedit was adored, worshipped, and possibly descended from Hathor herself. One woman screams so loudly she nearly topples over. Another beats her chest like she's trying to restart her heart. A third sings a hymn that is mostly vowels and drama. It's loud, it's sweaty, it's a vibe. And then the goat arrives. No one knows who brought it. It just appears tethered to a cousin, nibbling on the ceremonial reeds, smelling faintly of everything it's ever rolled in. Goats are not typical funeral guests, but this one seems committed. It trots alongside the procession, bleats during the prayers, and tries to eat part of the linen canopy held over Jedet's body. Some believe it's a sign, a sacred animal, a visitation from Conum, god of fertility and pot-making. Others believe it's just a goat. Ahmose believes it's ruining his morning. The coffin, shaped like a stylized human, painted in lapis and lined with charms, is carried by 6 men who clearly did not rehearse. It wobbles dangerously at every step, prompting gasps from the crowd and a whispered "not again" from the family matriarch. Behind them, the canopic jars follow in a smaller chest, clutched by a boy who looks like he'd rather be literally anywhere else. The whole procession winds through the streets of Thebes, drawing onlookers from doorways and balconies. Some cross themselves, others nod politely. A few shout condolences. One woman yells she still owes me 5 jars of beer, and is promptly shushed by a relative. It's a community event, part solemn ritual, part free drama. Let that sink in ancient Egypt. A funeral was also entertainment. The final destination is the necropolis, the city of the dead, a sprawling field of tombs, monuments, and half-finished stone structures where grief meets architecture. It's quiet here, but not in a peaceful way, more in the don't say anything too loud or the dead might hear you way. The body is placed before the tomb entrance. A priest steps forward, not the eyeliner one, but the real mortuary priest, dressed in leopard skin and ceremonial attitude. He carries a ritual blade, a small statue of Anubis, and the kind of expression that says, "I am very tired of people mispronouncing sacred words." It's time for the opening of the mouth. No, it's not literal. Well, sometimes it is, but mostly it's symbolic. The priest touches the mummy's face, or at least the wrappings where the face used to be, and uses the blade and chanting to open the senses for the afterlife. Eyes to see, mouth to speak, nose to breathe in eternity, ears to hear the praise, one assumes. The goat bleats during the ceremony. Loudly, everyone ignores it. The ritual is long. It involves incense, milk, chants, more chance, and the occasional moment where someone drops an amulet and everyone collectively pretends not to notice. Amos stays silent through it all, eyes scanning the linen for any unraveling. There isn't. His work holds. Finally, the priest pronounces the journey complete. Jedit is ready for eternity. The tomb is sealed. The mourners wail one last time, then immediately start whispering about who's next. And just like that, it's over. The crowd begins to disperse. The goat is nowhere to be seen. Probably eaten a scroll by now. Amos walks back slowly, his sandals scraping the stone. There's always a strange hollowness after a funeral. Not sadness, exactly. More like a stillness. Like the air itself has exhaled. And even in all the chaos, the noise, the smells, the dramatic exits, there's a strange kind of beauty here. This wasn't just a burial, it was a send-off, a declaration, a moment to say, this person lived, they mattered, and now they matter still. Modern funerals may have suits and floral arrangements, but ancient Egypt, they had howlers, sacred tools, eyeliner priests, and the occasional goat. And maybe that's the point. Death wasn't hidden. It was paraded loudly, publicly, with all the drama, ritual, and pageantry a soul could ask for. So the next time you think your job is exhausting, imagine being the guy who has to chase a goat out of a funeral while pretending not to offend the gods. That's a Moses Tuesday. And he still has 4 more clients this week. If you've ever felt like your soul has too many tabs open, congratulations. You'd fit right in with ancient Egyptian theology, because unlike modern concepts of the soul, which tend to be a neat one and done deal, the Egyptians decided, you know what would make death even more fun? Paperwork. And thus, they invented an afterlife system so complex it could make a DMV clerk weep. Let's break it down. You weren't just a soul. You were a multi-part metaphysical admin panel, complete with multiple personalities, overlapping job descriptions, and a cosmic HR department constantly evaluating your performance. First, there's the car. The car is your life force, your cosmic juice box. It sticks around after death, hanging out in your tomb, waiting for snacks and vibes. It needs offerings, food, drink, incense, because apparently divine energy still gets peckish. If your family forgets to leave bread and beer, your car becomes what historians call grumpy. Then there's the bar dot. This is your personality, your vibe, your emotional Instagram grid. It's the part of you that gets sad at sunsets and annoyed by sandals that squeak. After death, the bar sprouts tiny wings and flutters between the world of the living and the divine like a socially awkward pigeon. It checks on your family, reports back to Osiris, and presumably judges your grandchildren's choices. Next up, the AKH.RS, the OC. This one's more mysterious. It's what happens when the car and bar successfully unite in the afterlife and become a sort of radiant, purified spirit. Like leveling up into a glowing version of yourself that can hang out with the gods and maybe dispense unsolicited advice to the living in dreams. There's also the Ren, your secret name, which must be remembered by someone on earth to keep you alive forever, no pressure. And the Shoit, your shadow, which may or may not have mystical powers, depending on how poetic the scribe was feeling that day. Let that sink in. The ancient Egyptians believed you had at least 5 components of being, all of which had to be managed after death, which means dying wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a spiritual bureaucracy so intricate it would give modern software onboarding processes a nervous breakdown. Now picture poor Amos, our hard-working embalmer, master of bodily preservation and corpse couture, trying to keep all this straight while covered in resin and goat hair. This morning, he's in the temple annex, reviewing the list of prayers needed to ensure the bar doesn't get lost in translation. The scroll is 14 feet long, written in careful hieroglyphs that include instructions like place the eye of Horus on the chest, but not too far left, and do not, under any circumstances, misquote spell 125, unless you want the soul eaten. The bar, apparently, is very particular. A priest, one of the serious ones, with the charisma of a whetstone slab, recites passages aloud while Amos anoints a body with oils meant to entice the car. Cinnamon, lotus, myrrh, smells great. Works, ... DEBATABLY. Behind them, an apprentice is arranging offering bowls for the final tomb setup. Each car needs its own daily care package. Bread, onions, wine, water, beer, always beer. The afterlife might be eternal, but it's not dry. Watches quietly. He's not a philosopher, but he's spent enough time surrounded by the dead to wonder, what happens if someone forgets? If the offerings stop, does the car just sit there, pouting in its tomb, waiting for someone to remember their cousin's birthday again? Or worse, what if no one remembers your Ren? What if your name is never spoken again? That's the true death, according to Egyptian belief. Not physical decay, not even soul judgment, but oblivion. The moment your name disappears from the mouths of the living, you cease to exist, which makes every carving, every painted name, every label on a canopic jar, a lifeline. The tomb is not just a resting place, it's a memory machine. Still, the system has its flaws. Take the case of Intef, a minor official from years ago. During embalming, someone wrote his name wrong on a funerary scroll. One missed glyph. His co-weighted offerings were made, but the bar couldn't find its way back. Eventually, the co went rogue. There were hauntings, screaming, someone's beer turned sour overnight. They had to hire a priest to fix it. Cost 3 goats. So yes, it matters. All of it. The names, the prayers, the order of prayers, the order in which you wrap a pinky versus a spleen. One misstep and you're haunting your nephew's dreams for eternity, waving a half-labeled amulet and screaming in Middle Egyptian. Amos, for his part, has learned to treat the process like a sacred assembly line. Prep the car, check. Prepare the offering table, check. Tuck a small scroll of the deceased's Ren under the wrappings, just in case. Always, and in the quiet moments between incense swings and soul alignments, he sometimes wonders if his soul will be treated this carefully. Will someone remember his name? Will anyone chant for his bar, feed his car, carve his Ren into the stone? Probably not. Embalmers aren't remembered. Only their clients are. He adjusts the offering bowls, steps back, and signals the priest to begin the final incantation. The soul's departure is metaphorical, but in the silence that follows, it always feels real, like something has shifted, like someone or something is leaving the room through a door no one else can see. And in that moment, Amos forgets about the bureaucracy. The car, the bar, the endless prayers and labels. He just feels the absence, the quiet, the echo, the end of something. Or maybe the start. It's all fun and mummification until someone gets cursed. You'd think working with dead Bodies, in a society that worships death, would be a spiritually safe profession. But in ancient Egypt, being an embalmer was like walking a tightrope over a pit full of crocodiles, literal and metaphorical. One wrong incision, one misspoken chant, one drop of resin where no resin should go, and suddenly the gods are side-eyeing you like you just insulted Thoth's handwriting. Amos knows this better than anyone. This morning, a high-ranking noble's son storms into the embalming workshop mid-drap, waving a legal scroll like it's a sword forged from bureaucratic outrage. His uncle, Lord Hennetmeyer, recently deceased and extremely high maintenance, was scheduled for full deluxe embalming. Linen count 200. Amulet quota 15. Secret undertunic with golden thread stitched in the shape of a lotus. Definitely dot, except dot dot. There's a problem. Amos left out the lotus. It was a minor oversight. The fabric shipment from Memphis got delayed. The priest delivering the spell scrolls was drunk. And, frankly, the corpse didn't look like the kind of guy who appreciated embroidery. But now, standing in the heat of the mid-morning sun, watching this irate nephew scream about disrespect and eternal dishonor, Amos regrets every decision that led to this moment, including waking up. The nephew slams down a contract inked in black and red, signed with the seal of a temple scribe. It outlines every step of the embalming process, complete with clauses, fees, and a clause that literally reads, "Failure to properly embellish will invoke divine retribution and social shame." It's official, he's screwed. But curses, that's a different matter. You see, Egypt didn't just believe in curses, they weaponized them. Tomb curses weren't vague, spooky warnings. They were oddly specific and legally binding. You touch a sarcophagus you weren't invited to. Expect boils, blindness, and scorpions in your bedsheets. Forget to include the Eye of Horus in someone's burial charm. Congratulations, their ghost will haunt your dreams, and, allegedly, your crops. And don't think these threats were all metaphor. The texts were clear. He who defiles this tomb, may the crocodile eat his eyes, may his family forget his name, may his sandals never fit again. The sandals part always gets people. Still, most embalmers didn't fear the curses as much as they feared the living, because curses took time. Angry relatives, instant chaos. Amos tries to calm the nephew, offers a replacement tunic, a few extra amulets, even a sacred cow figurine he was saving for a personal project. The nephew is unimpressed. He threatens to invoke the temple council, possibly Thoth himself. There's talk of summoning a malediction scribe. That's when Amos pulls out the last resort move. He fakes a divine omen. "Look," he says, pointing to the ceiling. "That scarab just landed on the sarcophagus. It's a sign of forgiveness from Khepri. There is no scarab." But the apprentice, trained in the sacred art of improvisation, gasps and nods reverently. The nephew squints, hesitates, and then, because no one wants to argue with a god disguised as a bug, backs off. Crisis averted, barely, but it's not the first time things have gone wrong. There was the infamous case of Bakermit, a fellow embalmer who once mixed up two bodies, both merchant class, both named Hori, both died during a barley riot. Easy mistake. Except one was promised a burial with a gilded mask, and the other was supposed to be cremated. It didn't go well. One family got ashes. The other got a mummy with a faint smell of smoke and someone else's scarab ring. Baconmut disappeared shortly after. Rumor says he moved to Nubia and now sells dried figs. or that he became a dried fig. Depends who you ask. Amos, unlike Bacon Met, prides himself on precision, but even he has close calls. There was the time an apprentice used goat fat instead of resin. The body leaked for 3 days and attracted a jackal. Not a symbolic one, a real jackal, with fleas. And another time, during a public procession, the wrappings on a particularly round official began to unravel halfway to the tomb. The crowd gasped, the mourners screamed, a priest fainted into a pile of offering bread. It was not his best moment. The thing is, embalming isn't just science, it's performance. You're part doctor, part priest, part stage manager of divine expectations. And every act, every wrap, every oil, every line of text is being watched, judged by gods, by ghosts, by grieving families who think linen quality is a spiritual issue. It's exhausting and dangerous. There's a reason embalmers work quietly. There's a reason they live apart from the main population. People respect them, sure, but they also fear them, because if you spend your life dancing that close to death, well, maybe it rubs off. Still, Amos keeps at it. He corrects the tunic issue, adds an extra layer of linen, writes the name of the deceased in fresh red ink across the foot wrappings, just in case someone in the underworld is checking ID. And later that night, as he sips weak beer and watches the moon rise over the Nile, he reflects on how close he came to disaster, one stitch away from a lawsuit, one lotus short of a haunting. Maybe it's luck, maybe it's faith, or maybe, just maybe, it's because he's good at this. But deep down, he knows the truth. In this business, the line between sacred ritual and full-blown catastrophe is thinner than a linen thread, and tomorrow, he's got to embalm twins. What could possibly go wrong? In ancient Egypt, you didn't just take memories to the afterlife. You packed a full carry dash on the concept of burial goods. Wasn't optional. It was required. Your afterlife didn't come pre-furnished, and the gods were not in the business of providing complimentary soap. So the dead brought their own supplies, amulets, furniture, food, cosmetics, and in some truly unfortunate cases, roommates. Because in death, as in life, you are what you die with. AHMOSE stands in his workshop, arms crossed, staring down at a pile of objects laid out beside the latest client. The deceased is a relatively young woman, Nescons a minor noble, with major opinions. Judging by the mountain of belongings she demanded be buried with her. The list is EXTENSIVEA, bronze hand mirror, a wooden comb with exactly 3 missing teeth, a set of cosmetics so crusted with time they resemble fossilized blush, a half-finished game board, presumably so she could spend eternity losing to herself, 2 small jars of perfume. One still smells faintly floral, the other smells like regret, and then the cat, yes, the actual mummified cat, wrapped in its own tiny linen strips, face carved into a smug feline sneer, its name scratched into the sarcophagus in faded ink. Nephra, destroyer of mice and decorative. Drapes Amos lets out a slow sigh. Because once again, it's not about preservation, it's about presentation, the afterlife. According to the Egyptians, was an eternal continuation of this one, just better. Think lush fields, endless. Banquets, no taxes, and all the wheat you could possibly harvest. But only if you arrived with the right stuff. No baggage, no paradise. Let that sink in. Imagine dying and being told you forgot to pack a bed, or that you only brought to Shabtis little work of figurines, when you clearly needed 40. Now you're the one building your own afterlife house while you're better prepared. Neighbor lounges under a palm tree with a mango and a harp solo. The burial goods mattered, food for the car, jewelry for divine approval, clothing, even underwear, because modesty is eternal, tools for farming, weapons for defense. In one case, Amos helped bury a retired soldier with an entire bow and quiver, along with a stone-carved letter that simply read, "In case of trouble." And yet, some requests remain baffling. Amos once buried a merchant with 3 loaves of bread, a miniature boat, and what appeared to be his favorite sandal, just one. When asked about the missing second, the widow shrugged. He only ever liked the left one. Then there was the woman who insisted her husband be buried with her wedding necklace, which she was still wearing. The compromise. A clay replica. Cheaper, lighter, and slightly less likely to be stolen by future archaeologists. But back to Nies Hans. Her family is insistent. Everything goes. The mirror, the cat, the perfume, even the half-finished embroidery that she never quite got around to completing. Amos carefully arranges each item around the wrapped body, placing the game board just beside her left hip. An apprentice leans in. "Won't she get bored? It's unfinished." Amos replies without looking up. So was life. Somewhere near the head, he tucks a scroll containing chapter 17 of the Book of the Dead. Not the full version, that's expensive, but a summarized edition, sort of like a spiritual spark notes. Enough to get her through Judgment Day without tripping over her own tongue. And at her feet, nestled beside Nephro the cat, he places a small jar of honey. It wasn't requested, but he adds it anyway. Maybe the gods have a sweet tooth. Modern people are often baffled by this part of the process. Why bury food that will rot? Why waste perfectly good beer, oil, or incense on someone who won't taste or smell again? But that's not the point. The offerings aren't just for sustenance. They're for memory, for love, for continuation, a kind of spiritual gesture that says, "You mattered. We thought of everything. Even in death, you are not forgotten." Amos knows this. He's seen it 1,000 times. Some families bring gold, some bring tears. The poor bring a small loaf and a single onion, but they all bring something, because to arrive in the afterlife empty-handed, that's worse than death. That's being unprepared. Once, a scribe came in with a request to be buried with a stylus and a full jar of ink, so I can keep writing, he'd said, even if no one's reading. Amos wrapped the stylus in linen, placed it near the hand, and without being asked, etched a single hieroglyph on the lid of the coffin. Scribe. Because who you were matters, even when no one's watching. As Amos finishes placing the last item, the mirror catches the sunlight and flashes for a moment, just a glint. Nothing divine, just reflection. Still, it feels like a nod, from her or from the cat. Hard to tell. He steps back. Neskens is ready, surrounded by memories, objects, symbols of life. A full resume for the gods. And maybe that's the lesson. Hear what you take with you says as much about you as what you leave behind. So ask yourself, what would you be buried with? A phone, a playlist, a favorite hoodie, a dog-eared book. Be honest, and whatever you choose, make sure someone remembers, because in Egypt, they believed your soul lives on through the things you loved, and that, in death, the smallest trinket could mean everything in the grand golden theater of ancient Egypt. Everyone had a role. Pharaohs ruled, priests chanted, embalmers wrapped, and lurking in the wings were the true entrepreneurs of the afterlife economy. Tomb robbers, yes. For every sacred ritual and incense-scented prayer, there was someone lurking in the shadows with a chisel, a rope, and a very different idea of how eternity should go. Ahmose knows this too well. He spent the better part of his adult life delicately preserving the dead, binding their limbs, placing their amulet, aligning their souls like celestial IKEA instructions, only to hear a month later that the tomb was looted and Aunt Menhet's golden scarab now decorates a black market bracelet in Memphis. Disrespectful, he mutters, dipping his hands into a bowl of lotus oil. Lazy, too. At least earn your eternity. But tomb robbing wasn't lazy. Not entirely. It required timing, precision, nerves of stone, and the moral flexibility of a crocodile in a chicken coop. The best robbers knew the temples, knew the priests, knew which embalmers had sticky fingers, which ones could be bribed, and sometimes the competition wasn't even from strangers. Sometimes it was family. Amos still remembers that his cousin Beck, supposed to be an apprentice, supposed to be learning the sacred art of organ preservation and linen layering. But no, Beck had dreams. He wanted a shortcut to glory, wanted to be rich before 30. So what did he do? He robbed a tomb. Not just any tomb, Amos's tomb. Well, not his tomb, personally. It was one he worked on. A mid-level merchant, decent budget, a particularly beautiful Shabti collection, gone all of it. Beck had slipped in one moonless night, slid down the shaft like a sand-covered eel, and made off with half the burial goods before a guard's dog barked and nearly bit him in the car. Beck survived, barely, but he didn't walk straight for weeks. He also lost 3 toes and his ability to eat figs without twitching. Karma, the worst part. He tried to sell the amulets back to Amos, at a discount. There's something deeply offensive about unwrapping a corpse for months only to see the sacred jewelry show up at your cousin's market stall like it's a seasonal trinket. Authentic eternity, half price, today only. But Beck wasn't alone. Tomb robbing had grown into a side industry. There were teams, networks, underground buyers. You could fence a stolen statue faster than you could bury a body. And sometimes the embalmers looked the other way. Not Amos, not ever. Even when times were lean. Even when temple payments were late. Even when apprentices whispered that other workshops were getting extra silver for turning a blind. Because for all his sarcasm, all his eye rolls at incense and divine scrolls, Amos believed in the sanctity of death. He believed that what you buried stayed buried. Unless, of course, it didn't. Some thieves weren't after gold. They wanted something else, souls. They were rare. Stranger, whispered about in the back corridors of temples. These weren't your typical robbers with a pickaxe and a debt problem. These were spiritual poachers, people who believed you could steal power from a properly preserved mummy, that by desecrating the body, you could absorb its car, hijack its bar, rewrite your place in the afterlife by overwriting someone else's. It was madness, heresy also. It happened. There was the case of the man who tried to grind up mummy bones into powder and drink it, said it would give him strength. He died 2 weeks later, choking on a splinter and covered in boils. There was another who stole a priest's amulets and buried them under his own bed, thinking the protective magic would soak in like incense. His house burned down. The neighbors claimed they saw a shadow walk out of the flames holding a canopic jar. Whether those stories were true, Amos couldn't say, but he could say this: robbing a tomb wasn't just theft. It was spiritual assault. It was rewriting someone's ending, turning eternity into a game of keep away. It was worse than murder, because the murdered still got a tomb. The robbed got scattered. Even the state got involved. The pharaoh's guards would patrol necropolises at night. Temples offered rewards for information. Curses were engraved at tomb. Entrances written with such venom. You could practically hear the gods gritting their divine teeth. He who opens this tomb uninvited, may his tongue rot, his spine collapse, and his name be erased for all time. Which, in Egypt, was basically the nuclear option. But the robbers came anyway. They came poor, desperate, hungry, or greedy, or foolish, or simply practical, because let's be honest, if you knew there was a tunnel full of untouched gold and sacred gems, guarded only by a few prayers and a badly paid temple guard, would you resist? Let that question settle. Amos doesn't forgive, but he understands. At night, when he walks the edge of the necropolis, staring out at the dunes and the distant glow of lanterns, he wonders, will his work last? Will the bodies stay intact? Will their names be remembered? Or will some future thief pry open a sarcophagus, pocket a golden ring, and never know the care it took to place it? And more importantly, will anyone remember him? The man behind the wrappings, the soul behind the souls. He doesn't know, but as he locks his workshop and heads into the dark, he says a silent prayer for the dead, and maybe for the living who steal from them. Every embalmer dreams of landing a high-profile client, not for the fame, not for the glory, but for the sheer relief of finally being paid in something better than barley and back pain. So when Amos gets summoned to the temple of Ptah one dusty morning and told, with appropriately hushed reverence, that he's been chosen to prepare the body of High Priest Menkauhor himself, he does what any seasoned embalmer would do. He panics. Not outwardly, of course. Outwardly, he bows, murmurs something dignified, and pretends he didn't just internally combust. Because this isn't just any priest. This is the priest. The one who reportedly once fasted for 40 days, cured a boy of blindness with a look, and allegedly glowed slightly in moonlight. Naturally, the family expects perfection, possibly miracles. The body arrives under heavy guard, cloaked in perfumed linen and divine pressure. Amos's workshop has never felt more inadequate. The walls are cracked, the floor creaks. One of the canopic jar shelves leans slightly to the left. The apprentices sweep frantically, trying to hide the smell of yesterday's failed natron experiment. Someone lights incense. It immediately makes the room smell like burnt onions and anxiety. The priest's body is pale, thin, and eerily peaceful. The hands are folded in the classic pose. The face is serene. The feet, unfortunately, are enormous. Wrapping those will be an exercise in humility and linen logistics. Before Amos can begin, a representative from the temple arrives. A scribe with a scroll that might actually be heavier than the body. He unrolls it dramatically. Per the final wishes of the most revered Menkauhor, he begins. These rites are to be performed in accordance with the sacred sequence of rebirth. All 12 stages. Amos stares. 12. That's not embalming. That's a resurrection. Attempt now. Ancient Egyptians didn't technically believe in raising the dead. That was more of a mythological thing. Gods dying and coming back, like Osiris. Humans, not so much. But that didn't stop powerful families from trying. Rebirth. Rituals had grown in popularity. especially among the elite. With the right chants, the right oils, and the right arrangement of star-aligned tunes, some believed you could cheat the system, not just enter the afterlife, but walk again. Amos has done these before, once. It did not go well. The family of a general had insisted on a ritual involving 4 scarabs, a silver knife, and 2 trained falcons. The falcons escaped. The scarabs did not. The general did not come back, though someone claimed they saw him twitch. That someone was 6 and had eaten too much incense paste. Back in the workshop, Amos reads over the 12 steps. They include applying sacred oils to each chakra, which no one can define, whispering the awakening prayer directly into the ear canal painting, defeat with lapis-infused dye to guide the soul upward, placing a live lotus flower beneath the tongue. Where are we supposed to get a lotus this time of year? One apprentice whispers. From a miracle, apparently. Amos mutters back. The first 5 steps go smoothly. Oils applied, feet painted, prayers whispered. The priest looks as peaceful as ever, not more alive, not less, just ... Very moisturized. But then comes step 6. The chant of soul, unbinding. Amos hesitates, because this one is meant to symbolically open the heart and invite the car to return. And if you believe even a shred of what the Book of the Dead suggests, inviting a spirit back is a bit like opening your door at midnight because you heard a soft whisper say, "It's just me." Still, protocol is protocol, he chants. He waits. Nothing happens. The apprentices lean in. A breeze drifts through the workshop window. The priest's hand shifts. They all jump. Amos nearly drops. His incense bowl. Turns out it was just a poorly balanced linen wrap loosening under heat. But for a second, just one thin breath of time, everyone in the room believes, and then it passes. The lotus wilts. The oil dries. The final chant echoes flatly in the rafters. Menkapa does not return. He remains, still wrapped, revered, unresurrected. There is silence. Then the scribe steps forward, makes a quick note on the scroll, and nods. Well, he says. He probably didn't want to come back. Who would? Amos mutters. We've seen the living. Later, as they complete the wrapping and prepare the priest for final transport, there's a strange quietness in the workshop. No jokes, no curses. Even the flies seem less committed, because even though no one expected the dead to rise, the tiniest part of them all hoped, just a little, that maybe the stories were true, that maybe this one would be different, that maybe, for once, death could be reversed. But it wasn't. Still, they finished the job. The body is wrapped in the finest linens, anointed with imported oils, layered with amulets, and placed into a gilded sarcophagus covered in spells and symbols. And stubborn, mortal hope, Amos watches as they carry the priest out into the dawn. His back aches. His fingers are sticky. His soul feels heavy. But there's pride there too. He may not have brought the dead back to life, but he gave them everything they needed to keep going wherever they were headed. And that, perhaps, is miracle enough. Burnout isn't new. Long before emails at midnight, unpaid overtime, and caffeine-fueled Zoom meetings, there was Amos alone in his workshop, halfway through his 27th embalming of the season, wondering if he could fake a plague to get a day off. It's a dusty morning in Thebes. Again, the sun has risen like a judgmental god, again. And Amos is staring at a pair of feet, just feet. The rest of the body hasn't even arrived yet. A delivery error. Apparently someone confused Pharaoh's cousin with random merchant with gout. He's too tired to care. Everything smells like natron and burnt resin. His hands are stiff. His back crackles like old papyrus every time he bends. The linen bundles blur together, and worst of all, the last client's family requested extra amulets for extra peace, which means 3 more hours of precision wrapping and emotionally vague chanting. Burnout has arrived. It doesn't crash in like a chariot. It creeps. A slow tide of indifference. Tasks once sacred now feel mechanical. Prayers ring hollow. Each corpse is just another list, another deadline, another soul he's not sure he believes in anymore. Let that sink in. He who once spoke blessings into the ears of the dead now forgets which incantation goes with which organ jar. The apprentices notice. Of course they do. They whisper behind amphory, watch him with cautious glances. One even offers to light the incense, a job Amos always does himself. He declines, but gently, because beneath the sarcasm, beneath the dried oils and the exhaustion is something heavier. Doubt. What does it all mean? What's the point of preserving bodies when tombs get robbed? When names are forgotten? When offerings dry up and the gods go silent? He's buried men who beat their wives and were wrapped like saints. He's wrapped children who died too soon, with no scrolls, no spells, no one left to say their names. And now he's got feet on a table and a temple priest sending daily updates on client satisfaction. He didn't sign up for this. Well, technically he did, but it didn't feel like this at the start. Back then, it was art, purpose, a calling. His first body was a poet, a woman whose family sang as she was wrapped, placing flowers in her linens, whispering stories so she wouldn't be lonely in the tomb. Amos had wept when he sealed her shroud now. He doesn't even remember her name. Maybe that's the real curse. Not haunting, not miswrapping, but forgetting. He steps outside. The sun is cruel. The Nile glistens in the distance like a mirage pretending to be hope. He sits, breathes, watches. To ibises peck at the dirt like they know something he doesn't. And for a moment, everything is still dot. No corpses, no hearth, no linen. Just wind and river and silence. So yeah, he murmurs aloud, voice dry. Breathe that in, dust and all. An apprentice brings bread. It's stale but warm. They don't speak. Amos watches a boat drift by, its sail flapping like a lazy heartbeat. The world, it seems, moves on without him, and yet, he knows he'll go back inside. He'll finish the job. Again, not because he believes every chance still matters, but because someone has to do it, because the dead still deserve care, because if no one wraps them with meaning, they become just flesh and silence, because maybe, just maybe, there's still purpose in the ritual, even when your heart's running on fumes. He stands, bones groaning. Back to work, he unwraps the feet, checks the tags, and, predictably, they belong to the wrong client. Of course they do, temple runners. Always mixing up the pharaoh's nephews and random shopkeepers. He sets them aside. He doesn't curse, doesn't sigh, just starts sorting linen. A small act, a quiet choice, but it's what keeps the world turning. Not gods, not gold, not glory, just people showing up when no one else will. Later, as the sun fades and the heat dies with it, Amos lights the incense himself. The smell is sharp, familiar, almost comforting. He begins the next, wrapping slowly, hands steady, breath even, not fast, not inspired, just present. And that, on days like this, is more than enough for all their scrolls. Statues and sky-dominating temples, the gods of ancient Egypt were strangely vague on one particular matter. Why? Are the people doing their holiest work treated like dirt? You'd think embalming, the ritual process that literally secures someone's soul for eternity, would command a little more social respect. Maybe some applause, a complimentary jug of beer, a seat near the front at temple feasts. But no, Amos, despite 20 years of spiritual service, still gets asked to enter through the side gate. He still gets passed over for temple blessings, still gets whispered about by women at the market, like he's contagious. One of them even crossed herself the other day when he walked by holding a wrapped canopic jar. He didn't even drop it. Let that sink in. He dedicates his entire life to wrapping others for the afterlife, and still can't get invited to dinner by his own neighbors. It's not hatred, exactly. It's worse. It's discomfort wrapped in superstition, respect tangled up with unease. As if people want to believe that death is sacred, but not sacred enough to touch. So what does that make Amos? A necessary evil, a holy servant, a glorified janitor of the soul. The gods never quite say, oh, they're loud when it comes to rules. They're very specific about oil quantities, prayer sequences, and which direction to face while anointing a corpse's forehead. But when it comes to how the embalmers themselves should be treated, crickets, not even a passing glyph of appreciation. The priests, of course, get all the glory, big hats, fancy titles, divine wine allowances. They stand in the temples and call themselves voices of the gods. Meanwhile, Amos is in a sun-baked shack, pulling dried livers out of recently deceased nobles and praying his linen shipment hasn't been eaten by rats. It's fine. It's all fine, except it's not. Today, a royal scribe visits the workshop, high-ranking, freshly dead. His body is intact. No plague boils, no bloating, no obvious curses. But his family insists on extra blessings. They bring their own priest. The priest sniffs at the workshop like it offends his senses. He frowns at the tools, at the jars, at the very idea of being here. Then he sees Amos bent over a table, adjusting the linen wrap on a finger. Ah, he says, you're the embalmer. Like he's just spotted a cockroach wearing a scarf. Amos nods, smiles. Even he's too tired to be offended today. The priest launches into a detailed list of demands. Additional scarab placement, a ceremonial dye wash, gold leaf over the heart cavity for divine shimmer. He doesn't ask how much work it will be, doesn't offer help, doesn't even say thank you. He just leaves, and as Amos resumes his work, he wonders not for the first time whether the gods are watching, and if they are, do they care? Do they notice the sweat behind the prayers? The splinters in the fingers that handle sacred things? Because it's easy to build a theology from the top down, to make rules when you're the one getting the offerings harder. Maybe to look at the people scrubbing resin off cracked fingernails and say, this too is divine. The apprentices don't speak. They've learned not to when he gets this quiet. Instead, they help wrap together. They layer the scribe's body with linen, resin, oils, and every charm the priest demanded. Amos adds an extra one, not on the list, not asked for, a simple ujit carved from soapstone, tucked beneath the tongue. For protection, not for the scribe, for himself. Because if there's a God who watches over embalmers, he hasn't made himself known, and if there isn't, well, someone has to. Later, when the body is gone and the sun finally sets, Amos sits alone in the darkening workshop. His hands are shaking, not from fear, from repetition, fatigue, the slow unraveling of a man who's carried too much sacredness without a place to set it down. He leans back, stares at the ceiling. "Hey," he mutters, to no one in particular. "You watching?" The air doesn't answer. Maybe it never has. But he wraps the next body anyway, because someone has to, because the soul matters. Even if the gods forgot to say thank you. The day came quietly, almost without warning. A Moses mentor, the man who taught him the sacred rites, the art of patience, the weight of silence, passed away. It was no surprise. He was old, worn, his hands shaking like desert leaves in the wind. But losing him was like losing a part of the ritual itself. Amos stood in the workshop, surrounded by linens, oils, and empty jars, and felt a hollow space open where certainty once lived. This was no ordinary body. This was a man who had spent his life entwined with death, not just preparing the dead, but guiding the living through grief, ritual, and memory. Now it was a Moses' turn. The wrapping was slower than usual. Every fold carried the weight of years of stories told by firelight, of whispered prayers shared in the stillness before dawn. He wrapped each finger with care, remembering the way the old man's hands had steadied his own during the first brain extraction, remembering the patience it took to coax a reluctant apprentice through the endless chants and mistakes. There were no apprentices here today, just a Moses alone with the silence. The linen stretched taut over the body, sealing away a lifetime of lessons, laughter, and whispered curses about missing natron. He placed the canopic jars carefully, touching each lid with a reverent finger. Imsiti, Hopi, Duamotef, Kabesen, guardians of the sacred organs, guardians now of the mentor's legacy. Outside, the world moved on. The Nile shimmered. The sun traveled its endless path. Somewhere, a child laughed. Inside the workshop, time felt suspended. Amos paused at the face wrapping. The jaw needed to be set just so, not too tight, not too loose, to preserve the peaceful expression that had become the old man's trademark. He hesitated, remembering the first time the mentor had told him, "Wrap with respect, not just for the dead, but for those who will remember." And now Amos was remembering. He wrapped the linen with hands steadier than he felt. A final layer, a final chant. The workshop grew still. There was no laughter, no curses, just the quiet hum of reverence. Later, when the tomb was sealed and the mourners had gone, Amos sat alone among the remnants of his craft. The scent of resin lingered, mingling with the faint smell of myrrh and something deeper. Lost. He thought about legacy, not the gold or the amulets, not the glory of temples or the praise of priests, but the quiet work, the unseen hands, the ones who hold memory in linen and breath. He wondered if anyone would remember him like he remembered his mentor, or if he, too, would become just a name lost to time, a whisper in the dust. The answer didn't come, but Amos knew one thing. He would keep rapping, because some legacies aren't written in stone. They're wrapped in linen. Time, it turns out, is the only embalmer that never makes mistakes. Millennia pass. The Nile floods, recedes, floods again. Dynasties rise, crumble, and are replaced by foreigners who mispronounce every single local name. Sand swallows cities. The gods themselves are demoted to museum curiosities. And through it all, the work of Amos, and thousands like him, waits, tucked beneath the earth in dark silence. Fast forward a few thousand years, it's the 19th century. Europe is gripped by Egyptomania, that strange fever dream obsession with sphinxes, obelisks, and linen-wrapped mysteries. Adventurers, treasure hunters, and archaeologists with dubious credentials descend upon the sands, pickaxes in one hand and poetry in the other. They come to dig, to study, to collect, and if we're being honest, to loot. Somewhere in the Valley of the Kings, a team of British gentlemen in pith helmets and questionable facial hair break through a slab of stone and gasp. There, beneath their boots, rests a mummy. Linen perfectly preserved, skin tight and brown, jewelry glinting faintly even after centuries in the dark. They have no idea whose hands did this. They can't pronounce Amos. They guess at Okmos. They scribble in their journals about native laborers and primitive methods, then promptly pack the mummy into a crate and ship it down the Nile, bound for London, Paris, or eventually the Smithsonian. Let that sink in. A man spends his life ensuring that the dead will be safe for eternity, only for eternity to mean on display in a glass box, sandwiched between a dinosaur and a gift shop. Amos, of course, can't protest. He's dust by now, his own name fading from the crumbling walls of a vanished village. But his work endures. His wrappings are marveled at, his careful layering, his resin, his symmetry, all dissected and praised in languages he never knew existed. The irony is breathtaking. His clients, once anxious about thieves and curses, now have nothing to fear except the curiosity of schoolchildren and the relentless beeping of metal detectors. Museum curators hover over their mummies with latex gloves and conservation protocols. They debate the ethics of display. Is this preservation, education, or is it uncomfortably something closer to a new kind of tomb robbing, but with more informative plaques? Sometimes, scientists scan the bodies with X-rays and CT machines, mapping ancient injuries and dietary secrets. Sometimes, tourists press their faces to the glass, peering in at a stranger from 3,000 years ago, wondering about the hands that wrapped him. Would any of them guess at the exhaustion, the prayers, the sacrifice, the invisible artistry behind those layers? Doubtful, but Amos's fingerprints linger in every fold in one museum. A researcher notes the unusually intricate finger wrapping on a priest's mummy. They marvel at the unexpected amulet tucked inside a layer of linoleum last-minute addition by an unknown embalmer. They wonder if it meant anything, if it was a mistake, a superstition, a moment of tenderness in an otherwise mechanical act. Spoiler, it was all of the above. As the centuries pile up, the mummies travel further. Some become medical specimens. Some get ground up for mummy powder in apothecaries, yes. Rarely nothing says health tonic like 2,000-year-old resin and dust. Others end up on stage at Victorian unwrapping parties because there's nothing quite like dinner and dissection to impress your friends. Let that settle in your mind for a moment. Imagine living your entire life dreading curses, only to end up as party entertainment for bored aristocrats. The cycle of respect and disrespect rolls on. In the end, most mummies land in places like the Smithsonian, carefully catalogued, guarded by climate control, motion sensors, and that odd hush of reverence reserved for things both sacred and misunderstood. Visitors stand in awe. Some make jokes, some whisper prayers, some simply stare, transfixed by the persistence of flesh and ritual. The guides explain the process, the natron, the jars, the endless wrapping, the journey through the afterlife. No one mentions a HMOs. No one mentions the long hours, the tired hands, the silent heartbreaks, the tiny rebellions like sneaking in an extra amulet or scrawling a forgotten name on the inside of a shroud. But those stories are there, hidden in every fold. Sometimes a child presses their hand to the glass, eyes wide, and asks, "Who did this?" And maybe, in the faintest flicker of memory, Amos hears them. Because that's the thing about legacy. It slips out of your hands, spins through time, and lands somewhere you never intended. From sand to Smithsonian, from anonymous hands to global wonder. And in that long journey, maybe there is a kind of immortality after all. You think history is a story of other people. Pharaohs, priests, embalmers, peasants. So many faces blurred by centuries of sand and silence. It's easy to watch from the safety of now, snuggled beneath your blanket, drifting toward sleep as Amos and his world fade like distant echoes. But here's the secret ancient Egypt never quite managed to put into words. Death is never just about the dead. It's about us, too. It's about memory, about ritual, about all the things we do, big and small, to keep love from slipping away. The embalmers worked for the gods, sure, for the car, the bar, the soul on its endless bureaucratic journey. But mostly, they worked for the living, for those left behind, clutching amulets and hope, desperate to believe their stories mattered. Let that settle, because every jar, every linen, every prayer was a message through time. We were here. We loved, we lost, we remembered. Tonight, as you listen, there's probably a part of you, the sleepy, secret part, that understands this. Maybe you've lost someone. Maybe you've stood in a quiet room, holding something that used to matter, a scarf, a letter, a photograph, trying to bridge the space between now and then. Amos knew that feeling. For all the wit, all the sarcasm, all the complaints about goat-smelling funerals and insufferable priests, he never stopped believing in the small rituals. The wrapping, the oil, the silent moments that meant, for a heartbeat, the world was not completely indifferent. The world forgets so easily. Names vanish, monuments crumble, even gods fall out of fashion. But memory, stubborn as ever, hides in the folds a name carved on a jar, a face drawn on a coffin, a tune hummed by an apprentice late at night. We are the dead. It sounds grim, but it isn't. It's a gentle reminder that we are also the living, carrying the stories, the laughter, the odd, wonderful burdens of all who came before. You don't need a tomb or a golden amulet. You just need a memory, a moment of care, a kindness that persists, however small. A Moses story ends where it began, among linens, jars, and the hush of the Nile drifting through his open window. He was never a hero in the stories, never a name scribbled in king lists or temple records. But he mattered. He mattered because he cared, because he showed up, because he loved in his own quiet, complicated way, and so do you. Maybe that's why stories like his linger, even after the tombs are empty and the gods have fallen silent. Because the real afterlife is memory, the ones we keep, the ones we share, the ones we build from old words and new dreams. In a way, you are the final the one who decides what is remembered, what is cherished, what endures. So, as you settle into the softness of sleep, let the weight of history wrap you not as a shroud, but as a comfort. Let the rituals of the past become lullabies, the amulet become memories, the sacred jars become places to keep your love safe. You won't remember Amos, not really. Maybe not by name, not by story. But you'll remember the feeling, the gentle echo that someone once cared enough to wrap the world in linen and hope, and that, maybe, is all the immortality any of us ever needed. Good night, wanderer. You are part of the story now. If this strange, sandy journey into embalming nightmares and sacred linen left you curious, chilled, or a little sleepy, give that subscribe button a gentle nudge. For more sarcastic bedtime history, weirdly poetic corpses, and stories no textbook ever bothered to tell, stay tuned. A Mose would have wanted it that way, probably.